My name is Graham Norton and this is my vlog on skill versus capacities in speed and agility drills. But first, let's look at some definitions. In the book, The Little Black Book of Training Wisdom by Dr. Dan Cleather 2018, he states, a skill reflects the athlete's ability to control their body accurately, efficiently and in a timely manner. A capacity is the athlete's ability to express a given quality, examples of these qualities being range of motion and maximum force. The first drill we are going to look at is Athlete A performing a 10-meter acceleration drill. Upon analysis, we can see that the athlete struggles to maintain a horizontal body position on acceleration and within 3 to 4 steps is almost fully vertical, limiting the amount of horizontal force being produced. We can also see that the athlete exhibits backside mechanics throughout the acceleration phase and struggles to bring the knee through and get it into a good position in order to be able to strike the ground rapidly and produce more force. In order to determine whether this was a skill or capacity issue, we began with some power testing. In both the 10-5 jump test and CMJ, the athlete showed appropriate levels of explosive power. We then looked at range of motion as a possible cause for the athlete's inability to maintain a good position during acceleration. As you can see from the videos, the athlete shows a good level of flexibility in both the sit and reach test and also in the single leg RDL, showing good hamstring flexibility as well as single leg control during the movement. In an overhead squat position, we can see that the athlete shows good levels of mobility at the hip as well as the T-spine. From a side-on view, we can see that the athlete is capable of going into a deep squat position, which requires good levels of flexibility in hip flexion. This was then confirmed as we looked at the Thomas test, and the athlete showed no limitations in terms of the range of motion at the psoas or the rec fem. What we did notice, however, is that the athlete showed similar deficiencies in terms of being able to create the proper positions in both a wall drill and a knee skip, on both drills showing a tendency to bring the heels up towards the bum as opposed to through with a low heel recovery in order to strike the ground optimally. So in order to rectify this skill issue, we brought the athlete through a sequence of acceleration drills, starting with wall drills in a good position at the knee and ankle and working our way through marches, skips and switches, gradually progressing the complexity of the drill itself in order to try and improve the skill. The final progression was to load the athlete in these positions in the form of sled marches and resisted sprints in the hope of helping the athlete to be able to learn to produce force in these positions and help transfer this over to the drill itself. Next, we will look at athlete B, who's performing a 30-meter fly-through sprint drill. What we can notice when looking at the video in slow motion is that the athlete has an excessive amount of backside mechanics as well as quite a pronounced lumbar lordosis. He is struggling to get into hip flexion, which is causing quite a low thigh block during the movement, which again will decrease the amount of force he can produce in this position while sprinting. Backside mechanics during max velocity sprinting can cause excess strain on the hamstrings due to the position that the pelvis is in and the shortened position this puts the hamstrings in. On postural analysis, we can see quite the pronounced anterior pelvic tilt the athlete possesses. In our range of motion test, this confirmed what we've seen in our postural analysis in terms of the anterior pelvic tilt and the reduced range of motion he possesses at the hamstrings. As you can see, he struggles to get any range of motion really in the sit and reach test and also in his single leg RDL. You can see as he descends into the movement, he struggles to get the range required and has to go into lumbar flexion as he hinges back and has to use or lengthen his hamstrings. The other test we performed looking at range of motion was the Thomas test, which would be a test of the range of motion at the iliopsoas and also the rec fem, and we can see on both sides this athlete struggles with range on both the psoas and the rec fem. For these reasons, we deem this athlete's issues to be capacity related as opposed to skill related. And to address these issues, the athlete performed some anti-extension dead bugs in order to strengthen the anterior core and also performed some psoas marches in a wall drill position so that this exercise was more specific to the sprint itself or running in general. And we can see here that the athlete is out of an anterior pelvic tilt and in a more neutral position while strengthening the psoas. Another exercise we used was an ODL with a posterior pelvic tilt to get the athlete in a good lumbopelvic position while hip hinging back and strengthening the hamstrings at their lengthening position, which should have good carryover into the drill itself. After strengthening the athlete in these positions and cueing him in terms of what we're looking for, we moved on to some more sprint-specific drills such as A-skips and wickets, where we're looking for good frontside mechanics as well as that neutral pelvic position and high knee drive. Next, we'll look at athlete B performing a 180-degree cut as part of his change of direction work. What we can see as the athlete comes into the turn is that he struggles to lower his hip height as he comes into the cut itself. What we can see is he takes large step lengths coming into the turn, which would not help in terms of reducing the braking forces. Then, as we can see, as the athlete comes into the turn, he seems quite out of control and off balance and has to take 3 or 4 steps in order to get himself out of the turn and re-accelerate, which we can see from the dropping of his shoulders as he comes out of the movement. We had seen in previous tests that this athlete has good levels of mobility around the hips, but we wanted to introduce 1 or 2 more tests to look at some areas that would be specific to a turn, these being a T-spine rotation test, which we felt may be a factor as to why he was dropping his shoulders coming out of the turn, but the athlete did show good levels of T-spine mobility, and also a hip internal and external rotation test, as hip internal and external rotation can be important when looking at change of direction ability. But this athlete did possess good levels of mobility in both hip internal and external rotation. Next, we looked at strength testing, and having already done the power testing and seen this athlete had appropriate levels of strength for change direction as well, we tested his groin squeeze at 60 and 90 degrees, which he showed high levels of strength at the groin in both positions. With this information, we began working on the skill elements of the drill, and as you can see here, we performed planned deceleration. We also performed repeated shuffles and repeated cuts and accels at a lower intensity, focusing on the coaching cues of keeping the chest up in the turn and also slowly lowering the hip height as you come into the turn. And this helps the athlete to then break down the movement and perform the cuts with better control. Next, we will look at athlete B, who again is performing a 180-degree cut as part of his change of direction work. Upon analysis, what we can see is as the athlete comes into the cut itself and pushes off the line, we can see quite a pronounced knee valgus on his right side as well as some lateral sway in his upper body. Both knee valgus and a lack of control of the trunk have been shown to increase the risk of injury at the knee and hip in athletes. Again, we performed some additional range of motion tests with this athlete, these being the T-spine rotation test as well as the hip internal and external rotation test. On his T-spine rotation test, we can see he does have some limited range on both sides on testing, and also in our hip internal and external rotation test, we can see that he does have some limited external rotation on his right hand side, which was quite significantly different to his mobility on his left hand side. Next, we performed some strength and power testing with the athletes, and on testing we found that his RSI and counter movement jump were deemed to be at an acceptable level in relation to the task of cutting. However, his groin squeeze scores were relatively low for an athletic population, and this can be an indicator of low levels of strength at the adductors as well as the lower abdominals, which can be a factor when looking at someone in a cut and struggling to control the knee and the hip in that position. So, because of his lack of range of motion at his T-spine and hips as well as his poor strength scores, we deemed this to be a capacity issue. So to rectify this, we began prescribing exercises to assist in mobilizing the T-spine as well as the hips, and also strengthening exercises at the adductor and hip, such as the lateral lunge and also the Copenhagen hold or Copenhagen side plank exercise. And these will be progressed over a number of weeks in order to build strength at the hip and at the adductor in order for this to carry over to the cut itself. Building on the increased strength and mobility added from the previously mentioned exercises, we would add in more dynamic movements that would help to practice being more stable in that cutting position. Examples being the side shuffle with the dowel, as well as a repeated shuffle, which replicates the drill itself at a lower intensity and helps to increase the control at the trunk, as well as the hip and the knee when in a 180-degree turn.